In Book 1, Chapter 6 of The Sun Also Rises, Jake had plans to meet Brett later that day, but she didn't show. Jake drives around in the taxi for a while before returning to a familiar cafe, where he meets up with fellow writer Harvey Stone. Harvey is already drunk and complains about not having eaten in 5 days. Jake offers him a little money until the next check from Harvey's publisher comes through. They talk for a while until they spot Robert Cohn across the room. Harvey can't stand Cohn and tells him so. Cohn threatens to punch Harvey in the face, but Harvey dismisses him and leaves. Cohn complains his writing is not going well. Jake admits he would pity Cohn if only he hadn't fallen in love with Brett. Frances arrives and asks to speak privately with Jake. She tells Jake that Cohn no longer wants to marry her, and she is devastated. She feels betrayed, although she tries to appear optimistic. I ought to have known better, and when I tell him, he just cries and says he can't marry. Jake isn't sure why she's telling him this, and he tries multiple times to politely end the awkward conversation. Back at the table, Frances passive-aggressively berates Cohn in front of Jake, to both men's humiliation. Jake can't understand why Cohn just sits there and lets Frances run him down and emasculate him. Eventually, the conversation becomes so awkward that Jake excuses himself and leaves. Harvey Stone's inability to work characterizes the vices of the lost generation. Readers may remember that Jake introduced his friends to Georgette as writers and artists, yet the characters are essentially never working. Jake has an office, but he only uses it to send telegrams, never to submit assignments. The character's lack of constructive occupations again highlights the meaninglessness of life after the tragic busyness of war, when journalism had a real purpose and urgency. Jake, Stone, and the rest of the lost generation drink heavily to avoid thinking about what they've experienced. The fight between Frances and Cohn further demonstrates Cohn's character as a romantic. For Frances, being married would offer financial security and social status, almost like a kind of transaction. But for Cohn, marriage is about love, and he doesn't really love Frances. She put in a certain amount of time, and now she feels she is owed marriage in return. The breakup between Frances and Cohn highlights traditional female gender roles during this period. Frances doesn't mind losing Cohn as much as she minds losing a marriage prospect, especially at her age. She's a sharp contrast to Brett, who at age 34 cares little about traditional roles, easily jumping from man to man without feeling pressure to settle down. Jake's disgust at the way Frances treats Cohn foreshadows his eventual realization that Brett treats him just as poorly. Jake questions why Cohn keeps taking it like that, yet he will spend the entire novel responding to Brett's every beck and call.